Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Well, welcome to our second podcast in this series presented by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. I'm Chad Ellis, TALT CEO, and I'm absolutely delighted to have our guest today, colleague and a friend of mine, Dr. Roel Lopez, the director of Texas A&M Natural Resource Institute, and he's also a TALT board member. So thank you for joining us, Roel.
I'm glad to be here, Chad, and hope things are going well with your new position and leading the organization forward. So really excited about that.
I appreciate it, Roel. And, it makes, my transition makes it, pretty smooth and as easy as any transition of just Blair's leadership as well as the board's leadership. So it's been going very well. So, I'd like to just kind of dive in and kind of just, have a conversation and learn a little bit more about your institute and A&M and some of your work. So how about we just kind of just really dive off and you tell us a little bit about the Natural Resource Institute.
Sure. So a little bit of, I guess, history. The Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, which was formerly known as the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, so very similar name. We renamed or simplified the name a couple of years ago. Was established in 1978 as a unit of AgriLife Research and AgriLife Extension, as well as the College of Ag and Life Sciences. So for those that may not be aware, when you hear the term Texas A&M AgriLife, it really is comprised of 4 state agencies: Texas A&M AgriLife Research, AgriLife Extension, the Texas Vet Diagnostic Lab, the Texas Forest Service. Those are the 4 agencies, as well as the College of Ag and Life Sciences. So that's the broader umbrella for AgriLife. So the Institute was established in 78, but really wasn't staffed until 2007. The first director that really sort of laid the foundation for the Institute was Dr. Neil Wilkins, which many of you may know. So Neil charted the course for the Institute for the first couple of years. I was his associate director. He moved on to the East Foundation, kind of a key partner for us as well as TALT. And I took the current position in continuing that trajectory for the Institute. So both as a unit of research and a unit of extension, as you would imagine, we do not only the discovery and the acquisition of information, that's kind of our business, but we also translate that information in a very much applied, pragmatic way for key stakeholders, for key users of that information, like private landowners. And so that's sort of the background for the Institute. Programmatically, we work in 4 general areas, or bins, if you will. The first is the conservation of military lands, both inside as well as outside the fence line, so military. The second is with wildlife conservation in a very broad sense, but with an emphasis primarily on threatened and endangered species. So wildlife is the second program. If you're going to have a meaningful impact in terms of conservation and land stewardship, like a state like Texas and other similar states, you really need to work with private landowners in assisting and enhancing their current stewardship of these resources. So private land stewardship is a third. And last but not least is our work with land trends. So our interest or basic currency, if you will, is private lands, farms, ranches, family forests. We collectively term this working lands. And so understanding the current state of working lands, what's some of the future challenges and what the trends are in those rural lands is our 4th programmatic focus area. So military, wildlife, private land stewardship, and land trends.
Great, thanks, Roel. I mean, you think about it from TALT's perspective of, it's so important to have a great, a partner and a collaborator, as you and your staff and Natural Resource Institute for, all four of those things. Those really, from looking at it of a private landowner and that freedom to operate and all of these components of you focusing on that wildlife and the endangered and threatened species, looking at these, private land stewardship components, as well as this land trends is really key. I would love to hear you kind of describe and really kind of go in maybe a little bit more detail around the Texas land trends and some of that work.
Sure. So as I mentioned, that's one of our program focus areas, and for just reason, just because, again, you really need to understand what's happening to our working lands, our farms and ranches, to understand how to better program, how to better conserve, and incentivize their continued sustainability into the future. So the land trends aspect of the Institute of NRI really started about 2003. So this was almost a pre-institute. And as I mentioned, the first director of the Institute was Dr. Neil Wilkins. And I give a lot of credit to Neil for working with not only folks within the Institute at the time or in the department, really, one of the academic departments on campus, but also with a key partner of the American Farmland Trust. And so between this unique partnership of AFT as well as Texas A&M, they went through the process of establishing or defining the first Texas Land Trends Report. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that means. But the Texas Land Trends Report really had almost identical objectives to what our current reports have, which is assessing kind of the current status and trends in rural land ownership, land use changes, property values, things of that sort. Looking at changes in land size, land use, again, property values, trying to sort of project or look forward with what changes are occurring across the state and where changes are likely to continue to occur into the future. Looking at ways of informing policy development that is important and strategic toward the continued conservation of private lands. And lastly, having this kind of data available for decision making. So being able to make decisions in a way that we use the best available information and make the best decisions as we move forward. So the two primary data sets that land trends, when we use that term, sort of draws on is county tax appraiser data from the comptroller, as well as the Census of Ag data. And what that is, for those that are private landowners, every 5 years, the USDA Census of Ag, the NAS is an agency within that, the Ag Statistics Service, and they basically, among other things, gather this information. So you may have gotten a survey if you're a Texas landowner that asks things like, what you work on, a little bit about your property, a little bit about yourself, and so forth. And that survey is done every 5 years. And so that's a common question people ask, do you have more updated information? One, it takes a while to capture that information and curate it, but the reality of the Ag Census coming out every 5 years it sort of defines the data points when we talk about trends. And what I mean by trends is, what's happening with our working lands. Are we seeing an increase in the breakup of these working lands? Are we seeing changes in market values and property values and ag values, things of that sort? And so much like the census that we do for people in this country, the Ag Census basically captures or describes what's happening to our land. And if you accept the notion that that land, private land in particular, is sort of a base asset or resource to all of us, then it's important to understand what's kind of happening to those rural lands over a given time period and so forth. So the first report was, again, developed in 2013. It's been repeated ever since then. Our more recent report just came out here in 2017 data. And that's in essence what the Land Trends program or project is. Those 5-year reports are the main pillar, but we also start to look at other focus areas like landowner demographics, or maybe what's happening with lands that are under conservation easement, things of that sort. And so that's the broader, more robust program. And again, just trying to understand various aspects of private land ownership and private land management or conservation in our state.
Great. So a lot of information and a lot to look at from the very first one that Neil put together to where your last report was. Roel, some of your thoughts from that very first report? What were some of those key findings from that first one that I would say sort of set the baseline, and to this last report, what were some of those key findings as well?
Sure, that's a great question, Chad. And what's interesting to me is you can look at that report, and there's been I guess it would be four reports since then. The general findings and so forth really haven't changed much across this 20 some odd year period. And I'll touch on each of those. Outside of the dates and the numbers and estimates, generally, the big takeaways, and I like to tell this to people because it's important, I think. Oftentimes we see what's happening with our rural working lands by driving across the state. And really what the Land Trends project does is starts to quantify what we see in driving and looking through our windshields, right? And that was the work that AFT as well as Neil sort of focused in on early in the process, is trying to quantify those numbers to begin to tell a stronger story on what's happening, what we can do to change that trend if the trend's not beneficial to Texans and things of that sort. So those trends, and it's a process, are the population, state population's increasing or expanding. The first report started with about 19 million Texans. We're currently at about 30 million Texans, and that number is projected to go as high as 50 million by 2050. And so more and more people are moving to Texas. There's a concentration of those populations in what they call the Texas Triangle. And what that means is, if you can imagine a triangle between Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, as well as Houston. And so that off-center portion of the state is where the majority of the state population resides. Other areas where we're seeing quite a bit of change in population numbers are borderlands along the Texas-Mexico border. So more people then results in another key finding, land market values. Those start to increase in the state. And when you have a higher demand due to more people, so the process again is strong economy leads to more people moving to Texas. There's an increased demand for rural land, resulting in higher land values. But those higher land values is not consistent across the state. So you may see, for example, in the top 25 populated counties in the state, the average change in value is about $6,000 an acre versus the state average, which is about $2,000. So almost a threefold increase. And so as a result of that increase in certain counties due to greater demand on that rural land, you start to then see fragmentation, meaning you take a 1,000-acre farm or ranch, you break it up, it gets sold, it becomes a subdivision, it becomes a strip mall, things of that sort. So more people, greater demand, there's an incentive to subdivide or sell, and ultimately fragmentation and conversion. And I think it was Blair that said this years ago, and I love the reference. You know, the last crop that we'll harvest is basically pavement. And maybe it wasn't Blair. If it wasn't Blair, it was her husband. One of the two said it, and that's so true. You know, this process of demand results in ultimately a loss of a farm or ranch. And once that loss occurs in terms of development or what have you, the likelihood of it going back the other direction is obviously very unlikely. So over the last almost 20-year period, we've lost about 2.2 million acres of working lands. We've seen increases in overall average landowner age, which signals a large transfer of management and ownership is on the horizon. You know, in the last 5 years, we've seen the fastest increase in loss of working lands. And when I say loss, I'm talking about conversion. It's going to a non-ag use. So that's basically the story, if you will, from not only the first report, but the second, third, and now even fourth. And so what we've been able to do is sort of document and validate that continued trend. Sometimes it's a little faster, sometimes it's a little slower. For example, the loss or conversion in the previous report was actually slower than it was in the more recent time period. And so again, there's a lot of factors or drivers from that, namely stemming from the economy. So that's a quick overview of the what we call the 5-year land trend reports. Those are those 5-year updates.
Wow. You know, you think about it, you know, Roel, so what you just articulated and you know, the power of the land trends, right? Of kind of think through it from a TALT perspective. It's the big why, right? You just articulated the why to meet our mission of really, you know, of this heritage, you know, conservation, natural resources, wildlife habitat, you know, and really being able to hand that legacy and heritage down to the next generation. I mean, this land trends really articulates these pressures that we have, you know, on this issue here. You know, on another thing, I think that it's, you know, another, I guess, offshoot of the land trends is some more of this data-rich reports that you guys have put together. You know, really looking at, you know, you've done some other reports of land trends in the Texas borderlands, you know, around conservation easements, the landowner demographics are just a few to mention. Can you give us, you know, some highlights of some other recent reports that you've put together around these land trends?
Sure, absolutely. So again, this report comes out, the primary 5-year report comes out every 5 years. It takes quite a bit of time to curate or process, clean up the data. It's pretty messy data. So by the time you do that, by the time the federal government releases the data, for example, we got the 2017 data in 2019. So many times they're behind a couple of years or what have you. So what happened from our perspective is we started to incorporate other data sets that are actually updated or available in a more rapid fashion. We started to ask other questions sort of between these 5-year gaps, if you will. So we're not going to just sit around and wait for the next 5 years to better understand this. And so the reports that you've mentioned are some examples of those products or focus areas, questions that we ask in between this time period. So Texas Borderlands, this was a report that we did a couple of years ago to sort of better understand some of the trends that are happening along our state's borderland, shared border with Mexico. And, I mentioned the Texas Triangle, but Borderlands are another area that's seen some pretty dramatic shifts in land conversion and so forth. I grew up in the lower Rio Grande Valley, and growing up as a kid there in the late 60s, early 70s was really different. It was primarily agriculture. I was surrounded by orchards and row crop and so forth. And if I were to go back to my original home site, which actually my brother now owns, it's completely different. It's medical offices and it's become extremely urbanized. So this is an area that's of interest for a lot of reasons, because it's one of these areas that's losing its rural lands at a very rapid rate. But in that particular report, we saw differences in terms of location. In the mid part of the borderlands, kind of Webb County and north of there, it's still relatively rural. Was one finding, versus El Paso and the valley is dramatically very much urbanized. Because of the history of that area, how these parcels were laid out is also very different. Northern counties had larger, kind of irregular shaped parcels that was used for ranching, versus the area closer to the mouth of the Rio Grande and the Gulf was primarily ag farmland. And so the Spanish who settled that area initially established these things called porciones, which are basically these tracts that are real long fingers. And if you look at the map, a parcel map for, let's say, Hidalgo County versus Zapata County, those porciones become real apparent because, access to the river for irrigation and the irrigation system in the valley is pretty extensive. I, again, grew up irrigating orchards and so forth with my family and neighbors, and that was just kind of a part of the way you sort of live down there. But all of that, like I said, is a lot of that has changed here in recent years. So those are just a couple of quick highlights from that particular report. I don't want to take too much there. Another report had to do with conservation easements. TALT really spends a lot of time with regards to conservation easements. And so better understanding what's happening, or the value of those easements, and the value of the program that the state has, the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Conservation Program, that we've done. Actually, we're on our third iteration of that report, trying to sort of quantify the benefits of land conservation. What's the business side of land conservation to an organization like TALT? And so that particular report really serves to dive into that and better understand what those values are from a water perspective, from a hunting, recreational perspective, and so forth. Another report, and I'll stop here, that we have looked at is, and I alluded to this in my earlier comments, private landowners their average age is increasing over the last couple of years. The average landowner is about 63, 64 years of age. And so what we're seeing is an aging landowner demographic, and we're about to see probably a pretty significant shift in land tenure. And I oftentimes tell that to people is our country, our state is about to witness the largest change in land tenure in the history of our country. And so better understanding what the future is likely to hold, current or newer landowners, if you will, may have a different set of objectives, not necessarily wrong objectives, just a different set. And so being able to respond to that, absentee ownership, meaning you own a farm or ranch, but you may not live on the farm or ranch anymore. You live in a city. So those are all things that present for unique challenges if we're in the game of trying to promote the conservation of rural land, of farms and ranches. And so those are just three sample reports that we've worked on in the last 2 or so years, just to kind of highlight how that information ultimately can be used in the work that we do, Chad, and both the work of TALT, but also in the work of other similar land trusts, agencies, state, federal, and so forth.
You know, there's a huge amount of impact in those reports and all of that body of work that you've done, Roel. You know, beyond just TALT, you know, how's this data being used by policy makers and others?
That's a great question, and you know, when you look at some of the one of the reports I'm actually working on now is just editing the report draft. Actually, before we got on the phone here, you know, the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Conservation Program is the state's a leading program for the long-term permanent conservation of rural working lands. Other states have similar types of programs. And so one of the things that the Land Trends data and reports have served is actually to set that up. So years ago with that first report, the implications of the findings and so forth were important in initiating purchase of development rights type programs. Well, that's our version of that, the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Program, right? But other land trusts and similar kinds of organizations use this information in the work they do and identifying areas of conservation. Other groups like the Texas Rural Funders Collaborative, it's a collaborative of NGOs or foundations like the Meadows Foundation, the Mitchell Foundation, and so forth. This collaborative a few years ago really took an interest in trying to, they do a lot of work in promoting the conservation of rural lands, but they wanted to work collaboratively, to work as a partnership, to leverage their investments in the various great works that they fund in a way that could ultimately address this notion of changing rural Texas and how to best sustain and maintain the benefits that these rural lands provide us all. And that's something that I think is worth mentioning is, you know, these rural lands provide many public benefits, whether in my case, I live in San Antonio, I benefit from a ranch upriver, upstream in a lot of different ways. You know, another way that this Land Trends project data has been used includes in better informing some of the listings that are occurring, review of listings, if I should say, for threatened and endangered species in our state. So having that kind of information to know what changes are occurring, where those changes are occurring, what's likely to impact you know, regulatory constraints that may face our private landowners are a few examples of how this data has been used by scientists, by agencies, by policymakers to, again, as I mentioned early in our conversation, Chad, it's really trying to make use of information like this in our decision making. So obviously having a better sense of what's happening, what's likely the impacts are for a given decision is better done when you've got good data to draw from.
So Roel, I mean, there's a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of reports. You know, how is all this information being shared and getting out there?
So we do it in a couple of different ways. We actually have a website. If you go to texaslandtrends.org, texaslandtrends.org, a website that actually has that data that you can query. You can query it by watershed, you can query it by county or different types of regions. So that's one mechanism for sharing that information. Doing these types of reports, presentations, podcasts, videos, all of this information is useful in telling that story. And so I think you know and appreciate this very well. As is the CEO for TALT, like in my case, we're storytellers. We're trying to convey the notion of what's happening to our this precious commodity of rural working landscapes and what the impacts are. And so reports and these other media are a real effective way of doing that. Participating in various kinds of projects. For example, I alluded to this. One of our next reports is assessing the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Program. That was something that was requested by the land trust community of us to do, and we do that very much with excitement and interest, because what that does is it starts to again make the case for the importance of that type of program and the kind of work that we collectively do. So participating in those kind of projects. And lastly, sharing data with organizations that are of like mind to further our collective conservation mission is something that we try to strive for and focus on.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this land transit information is really critical. It helps us, tell the story and get people informed. It's been a truly a key driver for TALT success over the years. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and it'll be a key foundation for us moving forward. You've been involved with TALT from the beginning. And now you've, in the last few years have served on the board, from Roel. I guess I would love to hear from your observation from TALT's evolution, from the beginning to the end, and appreciate your thoughts and insights of me, especially stepping into this new CEO role.
Sure. So I've been involved in some form or fashion with the Texas Ag Land Trust now for a little over 10 years. And when Blair Fitzsimmons announced her retirement and putting TALT in your hands, it's all in your hands, Chad. So no pressure.
No pressure.
One of the things I told her, and I was very serious about it, is Blair, you've done a great job in sort of laying the foundation and setting the trajectory for the organization. And one of the things that strikes me when I look at TALT compared to other organizations, state, federal, NGOs, and so forth, is they're really viewed as a leader in land conservation in the state and beyond, particularly as advocates for private land stewardship. And I think the fact that folks from the outside and partners with TALT, the fact that they look at the organization as that is testament to some of the work that Blair did in those early years and continues to do. And even in her retirement, I can't imagine that Blair's not out there advocating for and working for private landowners and the stewardship of private lands. That's just in her DNA. And so that's also in the DNA of the organization and in the DNA of the board members and supporters of the organization. So, to me, the thing that's, again, so striking for TALT is it's really viewed as an honest broker. And I look at some of the landowners that have entrusted TALT in their in the management and conservation of their private lands. These are individuals that obviously have given this a lot of thought. That they, in their own ways, serve in leadership positions. Some of them across the state, and so the fact that the TALT's kind of viewed as an organization that you can go to for that's kind of service and support, I think is testament to the foundation that Blair and others have put in place for the organization to sort of move forward.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think it's definitely, you know me well, my passion of this private land stewardship and these components. And, I think it's, as well as mine and TALT's, right, of this culture and that Blair kind of built together is really ultimately it really just really comes about how we help empower the private landowner to be better tomorrow than they are today, and provide them a suite of tools, to try to help them through that, to be able to pass that legacy and heritage down, and to keep our working lands working. And, it's exciting. It's exciting times, of working with you and taking these land trends and other things to kind of, put together the story and have that impact. So what are some other things you have on the horizon, Roel, and, what are you currently working on?
Too much.
Yeah,
So
I hear you.
it seems like the things are always pretty busy and exciting at the same time. So yeah, I alluded to some of the other work from a land trends perspective. We're in the near the end of updating the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Conservation Program. That's a report that we've done. I think this will be the third time. And what it does is it assesses the program and makes the case for continued funding. The second report was an important factor in the program getting an increase in their budget. And so one of the things that we would like to do is again, continue to support organizations like TALT and having these kind of programs for leveraging federal outside dollars as an example, and ultimately the conservation of private lands. We're also looking at other reports tied to a landowner survey that we did probably about almost 2 years ago. We've published and have shared some of the findings from that, but doing something a little more comprehensive, and that report also is near its end. Looking at trends in wildlife management and wildlife valuation. This is an area that's emerging in our state and has been emerging in terms of the last couple of years. Looking at differences and similarities between urban versus rural lands is another area. And probably the last thing, and in my mind, probably the most, one of the more exciting ones is we've spent a fair amount of time the last couple months and hope to finish this by the end of the summer, early fall, is a really comprehensive web-based tool that can be used by private landowners, by land trusts, by state, federal agencies. So it really takes our current resources that are web-based, data sets that are web-based, but uses it in a much more interactive GIS kind of format. And hopefully that'll be available and be of use to those that are interested in ultimately conserving farms, ranches, family forests in our state. So
Well,
that's all I'm doing.
yeah, just in your spare time.
Right. Well, and if I could say this, I've got the privilege of basically representing a group of folks within the Institute that really do the heavy lift. I'm really nothing more than a storyteller for their work, and what we collectively have been pursuing here in the last couple of years. So I give credit to a lot of different folks for the work that we do, starting with Neil Wilkins to folks within the GIS team, Kevin Scow, Addie Smith, Ross Anderson. Boy, I shouldn't have started naming names. Allison Lund, and so forth. But they all know who they are. Brittany Wegner, Jim Cathy, and so forth. These folks collectively, as well as others, helped in telling that story.
Yeah, first off, I just want to thank you again, Roel, for joining us and really having a discussion today about the why. The first episode, I was able to sit down with Blair of really kind of laying down the foundation and her thoughts in that. And then really having this conversation with you today was the big why. And, appreciate having this dialogue and discussion. And more importantly, I just want to appreciate, tell you how much I appreciate you and your leadership as well as your team. As you mentioned before, I mean, without them, it's just amazing, and I think a lot of us, we get so bogged down in the details of our work that, we truly don't take that opportunity to really see the impact of our work. And I just wanted to thank you again for all the impact you have provided as well as your team have provided. And, I just really also kind of want to encourage everybody to really join our next podcast. We've talked to Blair, we've talked to Roel, we really, this next conversation is really going to be through that producer's lens. We're going to sit down with Bob McCann, a 5th generation rancher down from the coastal plains outside Victoria. Bob is the true leader of the industry. I mean, hands down. Bob has been the past president of the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. He's been the past president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and he's the current chairman of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And he's also a board member of TALT. And one thing, we're going to sit down with Bob and really just have these discussions and really visit about the pressures of ranching, this freedom to operate, about sustainability and conservation, and just really kind of tie some of the things that Roel and I had the discussion today through that producer's lens. So hope everybody can join us on the next podcast. And till then, appreciate it, and everyone have a blessed one. Thank you.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.